Okay, hello. I haven't really done this sort of thing before, but welcome to what will hopefully be a tutorial series on how to use Blender to make really cool looking protein images specifically targeted at biochemists. Now, there's lots of cool tutorials out there on how to use Blender, but really there's nothing filling the niche about how to make or how to break into the field of using Blender to make these cool images. Now we'll start off with what is Blender. If you haven't already, go to blender.org and you can download the latest Blender. Currently the latest Blender is 2.82a. Download, install that and boot it up, and we're going to get started. Now if we boot into Blender, you'll be greeted with what is probably going to be a bit of an intimidating screen, but hopefully we'll work through it as we need to. I will not explain all of it, but I will explain the parts that are required as we go through it. Now, what is Blender? Blender is a program for making 3D graphics and game design and all manner of things. It's now also a fully featured 2D animation program as well as 3D animation, but again, we're going to go through it as we need to. Now, it can be quite intimidating. I know when I started out that I sort of didn't use it because it was just too much, and because it's so powerful, because you can do so many things, it's hard to know where to start or what even you don't know to learn. And so hopefully we're going to cover some of that. But you'll be greeted by this sort of screen with this splash screen. You probably won't have any recent files here, but to begin with, we'll just click this new general file, and then bam, you're in a screen. Now this is what you'll always be greeted with when you boot up Blender. This here is what is known as the default cube. Oh, Siri, leave me alone. And this is present in the 3D viewport. So this main window here is the 3D viewport. Off to the side here is the collections, and this is how you can select your various things in your scene, or you can left click them on them in your scene. And this is how you start interacting with things in Blender. Now, this part to the right here is looking quite intimidating. We'll go through parts of this as we need it. Down here as well, up here as well. And like I said, we'll go through things as we need them. But we are sort of getting ahead of ourselves. And so what I wanted to do first was open up PyMol. You can use Chimera as well. But we just need a structure. So I'm just going to fetch a structure. Now this is one of the proteins that I work on, PPR proteins. Just get rid of those waters. And what we've got here is a structure, or a cartoon representation. And so what PyMol's done is it's taken a bunch of 3D information, well, XYZ coordinates of various atoms, and that information actually looks like this. Now I won't go through explaining PDBs, most people are probably pretty familiar with it, but Blender can import this relatively easy enough, but it's the cartoon representation, it's the showing important side chains, all that sort of stuff that is hard to do inside something like Blender. So what you'll probably find you do a lot is work on a file in PyMol, set it up how you want it, and then export it from PyMol into Blender to then make look very pretty. Now, what we're going to do is just as cartoon again. And so what we have here is PyMol is taking a whole bunch of experimental information and creating a 3D object. Now, one part of this is how do you get this 3D information into Blender? Now, there's actually a few different ways to go about this. There's a few plugins for Blender. So one that I've been using a lot recently is BlendMol by the Durant Lab. Also, quite a popular one is EPMV, which comes as part of AutoPack. This is in various stages of development, so I haven't actually used this a whole bunch. I found that it crashes a lot, whereas BlendMol actually works quite a lot smoother. But to begin with, we're going to do it the old-fashioned way, and the way that I still find myself doing all the time is if you have a model like this, you can simply file export image as VRML2. Now, in order for Blender to read it, we need it in a 3D graphics format, and so you can actually do something called save. So if we just do help save, you get a whole bunch of information about different file formats that PyMol can save it in. Now you'll see the usual sort of ones there, PDB, faster, etc. But what we're interested in is the 3D graphics formats. And so those are OBJ, MTL, WRL, DAE. Okay, so they all have their pros and cons and various sort of things, but we are going to deal with WRL to begin with. It's one of the most, I suppose, like stable ones I've found that work well. So we're going to export our image as VRML2, which is another word for WRL. And so I'm just going to save that to my desktop. PPR. Okay, so it's written out that file, ppr.wrl. And so if I actually open that file, desktop, demodify ppr.wrl. Oh, no, oh, there we go. So on Mac, if you just press spacebar over the file, preview will actually show you something, will actually show you it. And Windows 10 now comes with a 3D viewer as well. So there's our 3D information, okay? So we want to get that into Blender. And so we want to click File, Import, and then we got a whole bunch of different file formats that you can import things as. And so we're just going to choose the WRL here, and desktop, ppr.wrl. And so it's going to take a few seconds to load that 3D information in and display it, and there we have it. And so now that we have everything ready to go in our scene, we can start constructing our scene, making it look how we want it to. And so we got to learn how to now navigate around the viewport. If you scroll in and out, you'll zoom in and out. If you have a middle mouse button, click and hold the middle mouse button, and you'll move your camera, or you'll rotate your camera around. If you hold Shift middle mouse button, then you can drag around and zoom in and out, etc. Now, if you don't have a middle mouse button, you can use this up here. And if you hold and click and move around, you can now rotate around. And if you click on the hand, you'll drag around. If you click on the zoom button, you'll zoom in and out. Now, I highly recommend using a mouse in this program. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Now I've just turned screencast keys on, so down here in the left, you should be able to see what I click on, wheel up and down, shift, middle mouse, etc. So you can, if you get stuck, if you miss what I do, then you should be able to read it there, pause the YouTube video, etc. So, cool, we've got a grey thing in a grey scene, nothing's looking super interesting. So what we want to do is start giving it color, start adding some lights, start making things look cool, and it's the whole point we're using Blender in the first place. Inside Blender, currently we're looking just at the 3D view. What we want is a rendered view. So if we hold down Z, you can go up to rendered, or you can use these 4 tabs here. So this is the 3D view we were just in. You can go wireframe, you can go preview shading, we can go into rendered. So rendered is what we're going to be dealing with, and you can see, if we just scroll in, we're starting to see some light, starting to see things look cool. And so where this light is coming from is from this little point light source here. You can see in the outliner that it's light. And so if we go back to rendered view, you can see that there's some light emitting from this area, and we're getting some cool looking shadows and stuff. And so currently inside Blender, there are 2 major rendering engines. There's Eevee, which we're currently using. This is sort of a real-time rendering engine, so it's very snappy, very quick, and it still looks really nice. You can get some fantastic results out of it. I've used it on things like my poster and stuff that I'll put up now to get some really cool results. But what we're going to be working in today to get really nice looking results is cycles. Now, if you switch to cycles, you'll probably notice that your computer starts screaming, the fans churn up, and that's because this is a very, very computationally intensive render engine. Now, cycles is photorealistic. That means it takes your light source, it takes a photon, and it traces where it goes, what it bounces off, how it interacts with things. It's very computationally intensive, but what you end up with is a photorealistic rendering of what's going on. And so currently we have photorealistic rendering being applied to our scene. Now, if you have a dedicated graphics card, you can change this CPU device, render device, to GPU compute. That will significantly improve your life, and I'm going to leave it on GPU. if you only have a CPU and no dedicated graphics, or currently if you're on Mac, you can only work with CPU. Your fans are going to scream a whole bunch more, but you'll still be okay. So I'm going to leave it on GPU compute. Now, if I click around the scene and sort of look around, it takes a little bit to update, but I'm seeing some really nice lighting that's happening. But I want to do something a bit more interesting with my scene. So we're going to switch back to solid view. And what I'm going to add is a floor. And so the way that you add things to the scene is with Shift A. Okay, so alternatively, you can also go add up here on the left. So add, and you've got a whole list of things, but it's best to try and learn as many keyboard shortcuts as you can. Blender is full of them, and it's going to be overwhelming to try and learn them all, but the quicker you learn them, the faster you're going to be able to work within Blender. So if we go Shift A, Mesh, and a plane, and what we have done is we've created a plane. Now currently this plane is inside this box, and so what we want to do is learn how to start moving things around inside Blender. And so I'm going to click on this box, and I've now got it selected, or alternatively I could click on it in this outliner. So I'm going to click on the cube, and to move things around I'm going to press G for grab, and now I can move this cube around. Now, because you're working in 3D space and you only have a 2D plane to work on, which is your screen, it's going to be hard to position things exactly where you want them to. Now that is why there are modifier keys onto your various actions. So I'm just going to click that and press Ctrl Z to reverse it. So if I press G and then press Y, I'm going to start moving this cube only along this yellow line, or the Y axis. If instead I press X, now I'm moving it along the X axis. If I press Z, I'm now moving it only along the Z axis. So this helps us make sure that we're moving it only along specific axes. And so I'm just going to press Y, move it out there, and left click to apply that transform. And so what we're left with is our plane here. And so I'm going to click on the plane, and another transform we can do is scale. So I'm going to press S and scale, and so now you can see I'm scaling the size of this. And so I'm just going to keep on moving it, and you'll notice that as I move, or as you move your cursor to the edge of the 3D viewport, it now appears on the other side. And so it's actually a super handy feature of Blender, as you'll basically just go infinitely. It saves a lot of time of clicking, moving your mouse, clicking again. And so we're going to move it really, really, really big, about there. Cool. Things are looking good. So now we've got a plane, we've got our protein, we've got a cube. And so I'm going to click on our protein, press G, Z, and just move it up. Cool. And now your protein is no longer clipping. Oh, GZ, slightly more. Now your protein is no longer interacting with the floor. And so we have our protein in the scene, and we have our cube. Now the cube, I'm also going to make a bit bigger. Press S to scale and move it to about there. GZ to move up, probably about there. Now G, if I go Shift Z, it now moves perpendicular to the Z axis, so it's moving along the X and Y. And so click, so that was G Shift Z. It does the same if I go G Shift X, it now moves perpendicular to the X, etc. But I'm going to press Escape to cancel that. So now I have a cube, I have a protein, and so if I go, hold down Z and go into rendered view, you can see I'm starting to get a scene that's setting itself up. So what we're going to do now is going to start adding color to things. Now, one of the biggest frustrations for me starting out in Blender was, how do I make this thing red? I just want to make this protein a certain color. How bloody hard is it to do just that? Now, the caveat with that is that you are now working within a photorealistic rendering engine, and so you can't just make things red. You need to make it red and metallic, or red and skin-like, or red and looking like plastic. Things aren't just a color, they have a 3D surface, and light interacts with them in a certain way. And so Blender doesn't accept, well, it can accept just colors, and I'll show you what that looks like. And so what we're going to do, just going to rearrange your sort of viewport, you can click and drag on these windows, and so I'm going to click and drag that up there, so about half and half. Shift middle mouse just to move that. And now I'm going to click on my protein. So if we go into solid view, you can see that I have it selected. And so now down here, we're going to click on this, and this, you can change what these windows are. And so we're going to change from, currently it's the timeline. So currently it's the timeline. We're instead going to change down here to the shader editor. And this is where you start giving Blender information on how you want light to interact with your surface. And so currently the protein, which is selected, nothing in this scene has any shader information. This box actually does. But we're going to select our protein, and we're going to add a new shader. So click new. And so bam, you have a scary looking thing. I'm just going to scroll wheel in and out. We have a scary looking thing. This is called the node editor, or how you shade things. And so currently all of this information is feeding into the surface and telling Blender how light interacts with your protein. And so if we go back into the rendered view, nothing has really changed. It's still gray and boring looking, but this base color. So if we go base color, let's make it red. Cool. Now we have something that's starting to look red. Now you'll notice also there's some light that's it's looking red around it as well. And that's because, like in real life, something will you're lighting something up that is red, and that thing then emits some red light onto the surrounding objects. So it's starting to make this cube look a bit red, the ground look a bit red, etc. And so, well, what else can we do? We can make it a bit more metallic, really crank that metal. Now, the metal is a bit rough, so we crank that down, and now it's looking really shiny. Put that back to about 0.5. You can give it a sheen, and so now we're giving it a bit of sheen. Clear coat like you would see on a car, that sort of thing. Put that metallic back down, specular. You got lots of different options, and it's very, very complicated once you get into shading. We can even add in some subsurf to be about green, and really crank the subsurf. Now, what is subsurf? If you look at your skin isn't just one color. Light penetrates slightly into your skin, and then you get colors further in. And so subsurf is basically what color is it once you start getting deeper in. And so you can sort of see that this protein's looking kind of funky now. If we change that back to white, maybe it's more obvious. You can sort of see, it's like you can almost see slightly into the protein. And personally, it's a little creepy looking, so I'm going to turn off the subsurface, and we're just going to go back to our red protein. This is just meant to be an example to sort of show you how you can customize your various parts of the shading. But to begin with, for this first tutorial, we're just going to make a protein red and set up some cool lights. So we have our red protein. This ground I want to make a bit nicer, so we're going to add a new shader. So I selected the plane, added a shader, and we're faced with that same base shader. And so we're going to click, I'm going to make it a nice sort of blue, make it really metallic, and crank the roughness a bit more. And now we've got a bit of a nice looking ground. And then for this cube, select that cube. Let's make that, yeah, why not? We're going to make that really metallic, not rough at all, so it's really reflective. So you can see the reflection of that protein now in the reflection of this cube. Now that looks pretty unrealistic, so actually we'll give it a little bit of roughness. There you go, now you're seeing it's sort of starting to blur out the reflection. So now we want to start thinking about lights. So if we just go back into solid view, or if we look into our outliner here, we can see there are two lights. There's the light that comes with, there's default light that comes with every Blender scene, which is this sort of central light here. So I can move that around. You can see that the light is starting to move around. And there's also this other light, which came when we imported the WRL. I'm just going to delete that other light. So I'm going to select it and press X. X is delete, and it will ask you to confirm. So left click. Now I've deleted it. Now there's only one source of light, and that's this other light. So you can sort of see some dramatic shadows and stuff playing around. Now I'm not actually interested in this light, so I'm just going to press X and delete it. Now we have no lights, and so we're going to add in a new one. So Shift A, go down to light, area light. This is my favorite kind of light to work with. So what we have done is we have created an area light here. You can see it's quite small. And so we're going to go G, Z, move it up a bit. GZ, GX. And now we're going to introduce the final transform that we can do, and that's rotation. So if we press R, we're now rotating it. Now the same sort of thing, if you press a modifier, X, Y, Z, it'll lock it. So now it's rotating on the X axis, rotating on the Y axis, rotating on the Z axis. So we're going to press Y to sort of angle it, and you can see we're now getting some directional light. If we turn into rendered view, there's nothing going on. Now that's because our light's not very powerful currently. So with our light selected, our area light, come on down to this light tab here, and we click. Our power is currently at 10 watts, so we're just going to crank that up to 100. Still not a whole bunch. 1000. We're starting to see some light coming to the scene. 10,000. There we go. Now we're starting to see some nice lighting. And so go back into solid, take it up a bit more, go back into rendered. Cool. So now we're seeing some sort of dramatic shadows and stuff. Now if we go back into solid, you can see it's quite a small source of light. And if you've looked into any sort of photography or anything, how sharp a shadow is dependent on how large the source of light is. So we're going to make this a bit more diffuse. Going to take that up to maybe 10 meters. So it's now a 10 meter wide plane that's emitting this light. So if we look into our rendered view, we're getting nice diffuse shadows. So if we take that back down to 1, much sharper shadows. Take that up to 10, much sort of diffuse shadows. And so, cool, we're starting to get a scene together. We've got our protein, we've got a random cube. Actually, I'll change this color of the cube, maybe to something green. It can be whatever you want, but something green to begin with. And I will actually move this cube. So if we go G, moving around, Shift Z, it's moving perpendicular to the Z axis. So I'll move that sort of just there so we can get some reflections. So if we go rendered view, there we go, we're getting some reflections. Cool. So now we have a scene set up. We've got our protein imported. It's red, thankfully. And we've got a cube that's looking kind of reflective. How do we make an image? Now, the way you make an image is with your camera object. And so if you look in your outliner, you'll see two things here, a camera and a viewpoint. This one came in when we imported the WRL, so I'm just going to X to delete it. And this is the default camera. So if we go back into solid, you'll see this little object down here is the camera. So this is where the camera in your scene. Everything that gets finally exported from Blender has to go through a camera. It may sound counterintuitive, but it needs to do that. It's important. And so we have a camera down here. So the way you can view your camera is if you go click on this little camera, you're now viewing through the camera, or if you have a numpad, 0 on the numpad goes in and out of the camera. Or you can click this camera here. And so if we go into our camera, you can actually see we're quite close to everything, so you can't really see anything. So if we select our camera, press G, we're now moving our camera around. And so, all right, but we need to bring it back a bit. So if we press G and Z, we're now moving along the Z axis. But if we press Z a second time, we're now zooming in and out. So we're just going to take it way back. Oof, I didn't mean this to happen, but we're running into a bit of a problem. You can see that the camera view distance is sort of running out. And so we just need to change that here in the camera settings. So clip start and clip end. Currently it's only seeing to 100 meters away. So we'll just change that to 1000. I didn't mean to introduce that this tutorial, but that's where we are now. So we'll just press G again, Z, Z, and zoom on out. We'll go G, Z, just take it up a whole bunch. G, Y, move it along the Y axis. G, Y, yeah, about that. G, Y, move it along. So we're rotating. If we go Z, we're now rotating around the Z axis. And cool. And so we go rendered view. Cool, our camera's seeing something, but still not super happy with that. So we're going to go into the solid view. You can actually manipulate the camera from outside the view. So if we press G like this, go Y along to there, G, Z, take it down a bit. Starting to look okay. And so finally, the last sort of complicated thing I want to introduce is you can actually customize your viewport. And so if you go into the corner of any of these windows, you'll see this sort of crosshair appear. If you click left and drag, you've now made a whole new window. And so in one of these windows, in the left one here, I'm just going to highlight in here and press camera. So now I'm seeing through the camera while I'm also manipulating the camera here. So GX, RZ, GX, and take it back a bit, RZ. And if we can go into this window and turn it into rendered, you can sort of see what the final rendered view is going to look like. And so I might actually grab this plane, G, Shift Z, so it's perpendicular, move it away a bit more room in the scene. And then if I click on this camera, currently it's 50 millimeters. So if you don't know anything about cameras, the millimeter is how wide the lens is. So the lower the number, the wider it is, the higher the number. So I'm increasing to now 100 or so, the more zoomed in it is. So we're going to take this out to 24 mil, or far too much. Take it to 35. And now we can go camera G, X, and we just want to rotate Y. And so now we've got a framed shot. And everything inside this box is what's going to be rendered. So you can see there's some reflections. We've got a red protein, a cool looking ground. And this is probably enough that's probably going to go into the first tutorial. And so, cool, you've got your scene set up. Now what? So you can go up in this render tab. You can click render image. If you want it says there, F12 is also render the image. So I'm just going to click F12 and you'll see that your computer will get to work. Now, it's going to take a while for this to render. The more powerful your computer is, the quicker this will take. And so, if you have a small laptop, it may take minutes or hours if it's not super good, if it's not super powerful, but it eventually will get there. So be patient, but it's going to go through and render this image. Now you're seeing something that's starting to look pretty nice. Now, if we look sort of at the preview, there's a lot less noise and it's just looking a bit nicer in this rendered image. In the preview, it sort of previews it, but it just doesn't trace through as many photons as you would in the final rendered image. And so now we have a final rendered image. You can just go image and save as, and save this image somewhere on your computer. So I'm just going to save that to the desktop, untitled.jpg or PNG. Sounds good. Now we've got a rendered image. And so now we've got something that we've managed to import some geometry from PyMol into Blender, given it a color, set up some lights, and set up a camera and render an image. Okay, so that's probably maybe far too much for the first tutorial, or maybe not enough if you had some experience before. We will be getting into far more complicated things, making membranes, setting up scenes, animating proteins, all that sort of stuff. But we need to start basic to make sure everyone's on the same page. And hopefully, maybe you've learned something. Hopefully, you're now in the world of Blender. This program is very, very powerful. I've used it to make animations and posters and presentations. Some of my work on the coronavirus you can see here. It's been picked up by various news sites. And so Blender is very, very powerful. You can see in other people's work, it's also very, very powerful. And so it's a good skill to have to be able to sort of play around in it. So thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this has been of some help. If you have feedback, if you want to see a particular thing done or how to do it, if I went over things too quickly and you'd like to see things in more detail, either tweet at me or just leave something, a comment in the comment section. But otherwise, I'll leave it there for now. And thanks everyone for joining in. I hope it was helpful.